In this class, we're going to take a look at inequations, but we're going to look at some particular scenarios that you need to be aware of that can come up in these questions, which are a little trickier to deal with than, say, entry-level inequations. So I'm going to assume you've already watched the class on solving inequations, and in this class, we're just going to take that a little further. We're still going to be solving inequations, but these questions have got scenarios that we need to think about a couple of other skills over and above what you learned in the first class. So solving an inequation is a similar process to solving an equation, but there can be one or two kind of major differences, and the main one is what we're going to chat about today. So if you've got an equation, so let's say that you've got 10, this is going to be a very trivial equation, so let's say you've got 10 equals 10. Which is obviously true, right? So 10 equals 10. If you multiply both sides of that equation by -1, or divide by -1, so let's say we're multiplying that by -1, we're going to multiply that by -1, then we get -10 on the left and we get -10 on the right, okay? 10 times -1 is -10. And that's equal to -10. So is that still true? Does -10 equal -10? Yeah, of course it does. So they're still the same number, so that's fine. If, however, we try and do a similar thing with an inequation, so if we've got 12 is less than 14, which is true, 12 less than 14, or 14 bigger than 12, reading it right to left. If we do the same thing, if we multiply both sides of that inequation by -1. We've now got -12 on the left, we've got -14 on the right, -12 less than -14. Is that still true? No, it's not true anymore, is it? Because -14 is a smaller number than -12. So when you're multiplying an inequation by a negative, the bigger number is now becoming the negative of that number, so it's becoming more negative than the smaller number. So -14 is now more negative than -12, telling us that now the sign needs to go the other way. So basically, when you take an inequation and you multiply both sides by a negative number or divide by a negative number, either of those, basically change these into their negative equivalent or some multiple of that, then you've got to switch the sign around. So in some inequations, you're going to find yourself in a scenario where you've ended up with a negative coefficient of the x term. So what do I mean by that? Well, say you've worked through your inequation and you end up with -3x is less than 9. So if that had been just 3x is less than 9, then you say, okay, that's fine, I know what to do there. I just divide both sides by 3 and I get x is less than 3, and we're done. But if this is a negative in here, we're dividing by -3. So both sides are being divided by a negative, just like in the scenario I had there. 9 divided by -3 is -3, that's fine. But we've divided by a negative, so we've got to switch the direction of the sign. That's the main takeaway from what we're going to look at today. If on the last line of working, usually the last line, it could be earlier in the working, but it should be really the last line. On that last line, if you're dividing by a negative, flip the direction of the sign. If it's a positive, you don't need to do that, like in the previous class. If it's a negative, you do have to do that. It's a really, really common scenario in inequations, and a lot of students do forget to flip the sign. It would only be the loss of like 1 mark, but still, every mark tends to count on a test or an exam, so it's good to know about it. So let's take a look at this first one here, and then we're going to work through these different style of examples. So this guy here, generally we're gathering the a terms on the left. So let's do that. So we're going to have -5a minus 4a is greater than -9. -5 minus 4 is -9, so we're going to get -9a is greater than -9. So at this point we're going to divide both sides by -9. So let me just write that out. So we're going to get a on this side, because we divide by this number to take us down to a. On this side we're going to have -9 divided by -9. Because we've divided by a negative number, we know that we need to flip the direction of the sign, that's the key. And then -9 divided by -9 is just 1, So the final answer would just be a is less than 1. So all of the working is the same, it's just this thing here. That's the only quirk, is at that line where you're dividing by the negative, flip the direction of the sign. But one thing to be aware of, you can avoid this, because even though in this class I'm emphasizing, flipping the sign, you've also got the option to take the a term to the other side. So let's rework that one. So if you've got minus 5a greater than 4a minus 9, you could just take the a over there instead, which means you would get 4a plus 5a over here. Take the minus 9 to this side to make it positive 9. This is going to be positive 9a. You've got the same kind of thing you had here, but they're positives. Divide both sides by 9, and you would get this. Now, if you look at the answers, they look the wrong way around, but they're saying the same thing. A is less than 1. Reading this one right to left, a is less than 1. And you could take another line here and just spin that around to say a is less than 1. So you do get the same answer either way. The only potential issue with this way, which keeps all the positives all the way through, you're never flipping the direction of the sign, but you do have to remember what to do when the a ends up here on the right hand side, and you've got to make this final kind of move. Because generally that's okay to leave it like that, but generally we want to end up with the variable term back on the left. Let's focus in this class on this method, because we really want to focus on what to do with flipping the sign, but just be aware that you can avoid it by just taking the terms to the other side. Okay, so let's have a look at the next example. So fairly similar again, we've just got a few terms to deal with. So we'll leave the minus 2d on this side. I'm going to take the 3 over, so it becomes 5 minus 3. So we get minus 2d is less than 5 minus 3 is 2. Dividing both sides by negative 2. Flipping the sign because we're dividing by a negative. 2 divided by negative 2 is negative 1. So that says that the solution to that inequation is all the d values greater than negative 1. So what could the d values be? The d values could be any number strictly greater than negative 1. Remember, greater than negative 1 is going up the way, so that would be things like d could be negative 1/2, it could be 0, it could be 1, it could be 10. Basically any number that's bigger than negative 1 is going to be included in this, what we call a range of values. So there are infinitely many solutions to this equation. In fact, even just in that gap there are infinitely many numbers. So there's like, just solutions go on forever. Okay, so that one was fairly easy. The last one looks a little uglier. It's got a bracket to deal with, but like equations, anytime you see a bracket in these, just multiply out the bracket and then see how that leaves you. So our first move will just be to leave the left-hand side, multiply out the bracket. So 2 times 3 gives us 6, 2 times 2a gives us 4a, of course. And then we've got a choice here. So at this point, are we going to gather the a terms over here and not have the negative to deal with, or gather them over here and have to deal with a negative and remember to flip the sign? That is a choice that you'll face. It doesn't really matter. As long as you get, well, the ideal scenario would be to get competent with both. As long as you keep track of what you're doing, it should be fine. Let's work it both ways. So we'll work it one way over here and one way over here. So on this side, let's gather everything on the left. So that would be minus 5a minus 4a, less than or equal to 6 minus 3, which would be 3. This is going to become minus 9a, less than or equal to 3. Dividing by negative 9, so flipping the sign around, so it becomes a is greater than or equal to 3 over minus 9. And that's us done, apart from we could simplify the fraction a wee bit. So let's go ahead and do that. So dividing top and bottom by 3 and writing it as minus 1 over 3. Should be, when we work it the other way, we get the same thing. In fact, it's quite a good check to make sure that we do, but that's what we reckon the solution should come out to be. Only thing we did there that was kind of clever was dividing by the negative and flipping the sign at that point. This time we'll gather them the other way. So taking the 6 over here, 3 minus 6 would give you minus 3. Keeping the sign the same way because we're not dividing by any negatives. Taking the 5a over there, we're going to get 4a plus 5a. you should end up basically with the same line of working, but with just different signs. So a plus instead of a minus, or a minus instead of a plus. So we get a 9a there, dividing both sides by 9, and we get minus 3 over 9 is less than or equal to a. Simplifying down the fraction, minus 1 over 3 less than or equal to a. So just checking that out. So this guy said a is greater than or equal to minus 1/3. This guy, reading him right to left, says a greater than or equal to minus 1/3. You could then take this one and spin it around just to put it with the a on the left hand side. If you're doing that, just be careful that you keep the sharp end connected to the number and the open end connected, in this case, to the letter. So you end up with the same solution either way. It might be best just to try some of these and check out your own personal preference. But like I said earlier, ideally be able to work them both ways, just in case you get scenarios where for some reason you've got to work it in one particular way. But the main takeaway from this class is if you're dividing by a negative on this like second to last line, I guess, or last line of working, flip the sign around and just keep careful track of your working with these. Take your time with them. They're not particularly difficult. If you've got experience doing equations, solving equations, then they're very, very similar. It's just these little quirks with inequations that you've got to keep track of. So that's pretty much all there is to know there. Just check out a few practice questions, and then when you're comfortable, move on to the next topic.